Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Wazoku's webinar series, Innovation at Scale. My name is Lisa Jackaman, and today I am joined by my colleague, Andreana Benhoff. We are senior innovation consultants here at Wazoku, and today we plan to share a little around how we plan a challenge. This is the first in a series of webinars on the topic of challenge planning, which is an approach or methodology that can be applied to internal challenges, but also used for co-creation or external challenges. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining the session today and invite you to add any questions to the chat. We will answer either during or at the end of this presentation. Before we get into the topic of challenge planning part 1, I would like to tell you a little bit more around how you can use Wazoku and how we help organizations innovate with internal and external communities. And then we'll have a look at challenge planning part 1 and how this approach can be applied to, as I said, both internal and co-creation external challenges. And then just to add, future webinars will cover additional considerations when you're looking to frame or configure your challenge and additional planning, for example, with communications. So at Wazoku, we work with organizations to embed ways of working and processes for innovating at scale, providing a way to crowdsource ideas, suggestions, problems, and solutions from different audiences, be those within the organization or known to the organization or to a fully open crowd. We do this by using a methodology called challenge-driven innovation, and I will share that with you in a moment. Rather than just asking anyone for an idea, we focus on breaking down important goals and opportunities into specific challenges and invite the crowd to contribute either through sharing their ideas, commenting and collaborating, developing the ideas, voting or ranking and evaluating those ideas. And just on the latter there, you can find a webinar on evaluation presented by Bea and Abby listed in the previous webinar recordings. As well as providing the platform to capture, refine, evaluate, and select those ideas, we want our organizations to have visibility into the metrics and health of their challenges and communities. It's through these insights they can work to improve their approach over time and aim to provide that end-to-end capability and repeatable process and value capture for their organization by crowdsourcing ideas from anyone, anywhere, and anytime. So if we take a look at challenge-driven innovation, here we have the challenge-driven innovation mapped out for ease. So if you take a project, a program, or even an area of the business, be it around sustainability or cost reduction, new products, or even the example that we're taking today around customer experience, and then break it down into specific problems, needs, or challenges where crowdsourcing can be leveraged to identify those actionable solutions or ideas. This enables organizations to make those qualified decisions around the types of challenges being run and make it easier to get those ideas through to conclusion because those ideas are then in scope, they have that business owner, and they're implementable, and they add, importantly, they add the value and the benefits. So once the organizations have determined the pipeline of challenges, the next area to select is the channels. Who is the right audience to solve these problems? It might be your internal employees, it might be those outside of your organization, or in fact, it might be both. We know that crowd diversity is an important element to creating those serendipitous and innovative ideas. Once that crowd has been identified, the challenge planned, which is where we're going to focus today around the planning, and then launched, the ideas or solutions are evaluated and selected before going into the organization for further development and solution. As a process, this is a great way to fill your innovation pipeline with ideas and solutions which address real business problems and provide those solutions. Today, we focus on the first part of the challenge planning around defined challenges. Andreana will share with you an example scenario to keep in mind as we walk through this approach. Andreana, over to you.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned, we are going to have 3 different series here in terms of getting a challenge launched, right? I think we really break it down into 3 key phases. First of which is really around the challenge background, right? And that's really defining the challenge, including the sponsor, what we're looking to solve, and the success criteria. It also includes who we want to reach out to in terms of the target audience. So as Lisa mentioned, we can reach out to our internal employees, our external audiences, including customers, vendors, partners, etc., or to our global crowd. The second part of this approach is really going to be around identifying what the process looks like, right? And that's going to be, so as soon as we launch a challenge, what is the user experience through to selecting what the ideas, which ideas we want to take forward. As part of that, we also will include some challenge engagement metrics. What do we want to see in terms of participation and ideas themselves? The last part of this is really diving into communications. Communications are critical to a successful challenge. When we're thinking about communications, we really want to dive into a few key areas. First of which is what types of communications we want to utilize, so which channels we're going to use, what the communications are going to be and what they're going to say and what the message is included in those, and then who is our target audience for those communications. So again, for today, we're going to focus in on the challenge background and then look out for future webinars where we're going to dive into parts 2 and parts 3. Okay, so what we thought, again, might be beneficial is to give you a sample scenario as we're going through this experience. So in this scenario that we're looking at, we have the VP of Customer Experience who needs to improve customer satisfaction. Their Net Promoter Score has been getting lower and lower over the recent years, and now she has a goal to figure out how to improve that NPS score within the next 12 months. Our VP does have some initial ideas on how she can achieve this, but she really wants to reach out to some other folks that are on the ground to help identify some additional ideas on where this can be improved. And so what we're going to do for today is we're really going to dive into the part 1, which is really looking to confirm who the sponsor is for the challenge. So who's the person that has a problem or opportunity that needs to be solved? What is that problem that we're looking to solve? Who should we reach out to help solve it? What is the process going to be from identifying ideas through selecting those for action? And then the last part is the timeline. When are we looking to launch? When do we need to have ideas selected and so forth? So we're going to dive into each of these in the upcoming time that we have here today. So let's start off with challenge sponsorship. Really, this is making sure we have executive alignment in place. So first off, we want to ask ourselves, who is the executive that cares about this issue and why did they care about it? So in our sample scenario, we have the VP of the customer experience team who needs to get her NPS scores up, right? She has an issue, it's tied to her KPIs and basically her bonus at the end of the year. So she wants to make sure her NPS numbers are going up. We also want to think about, does this overall objective align with our business strategy? We have seen in the past where we have a problem or opportunity that doesn't necessarily align with the overall business strategy. And what happens is ideas don't end up getting executed. So we need to really make sure we're in sync with the overall company objectives on this one. In this case, when we're talking about NPS scores, we're talking about retention issues and other reasons clients may not be satisfied. So of course that does align with our overall business strategy. And then we really want to ask the sponsor a few things. Oh, sorry, Lisa, if you can just go back. We want to ask the sponsor a few key questions, right? First of which is, do they have funding to be able to take ideas forward? So if at the close of the challenge, they identify 3, 5, however many ideas, do they have a budget in place to be able to action those ideas? The second part of this is, do they have a team of folks that might be able to help implement those ideas? So do they have resources available to take the action? The second question we're going to ask of the sponsor is, do they have somebody that they can delegate on a day-to-day basis to make sure this challenge is successful? Typically, when we're working with sponsors, they're pretty high up in the organization with limited availability. We would ask that they have somebody else that can work with us on a regular basis as we're going through the challenge experience to make sure everything is getting completed. So communications are being sent. We've identified what the challenge process is going to be. We've selected ideas for action, really just kind of monitoring the challenge as it progresses. The last piece that we want to ask the sponsor is if they have any subject matter experts in mind that can help evaluate the ideas. We could end up with, 50, 100, 200 ideas, really depending on what the question is and who we're reaching out to. That's a lot to go through at the close of the challenge. So having those subject matter experts come in and help do an initial filter can really help at the close of the challenge determine those top ideas and simplify the process. So again, we typically recommend that they come up with about 3 to 5 folks that can help with that initial filtering of the ideas. All right, next, Lisa. All right, so now that we've confirmed our sponsor, we really want to dive in a little bit more into the problem that we're trying to address. We know the ultimate goal here is to improve the NPS scores, but when we're thinking about what is the question that we want to ask the audience, we're probably not going to go out to them and just say, how do we improve our NPS score? We're probably going to think a little bit more about what is it that we need to solve for that's going to improve that score. So we can think about it more at a broader scale of how do we improve the customer experience. Think about it when we go that way, it does typically result in more ideas, and sometimes not always as good a quality if you kind of dive in and think about something a little bit more focused. Focused topics, you're going to have less ideas, but typically they're more quality. So when you're thinking through to determine, do we want to go broad? Do we want to be more focused? What are you looking for in terms of the actual ideas? Are you thinking about engagement, or are you thinking about, hey, we really just need to figure out what these ideas can be to take action to solve for this issue? So we typically recommend being a little bit more focused so that you have those good quality ideas you can take action on. So when we're thinking about going focused, maybe in this scenario that we're referring to, we can think about dive into just one part of the customer journey. So maybe it's, hey, you know what, we're getting a lot of feedback that the onboarding experience is not as smooth as it could be. Let's focus our challenge topic on how to improve the onboarding experience. Maybe it could be, hey, part of the renewals is a little bit clunky. It's not going as well as we expect. We can dive into that, right? So you can think about what are some focus areas we want to dive into rather than just having the broad, how can we improve the employee experience? The second component of this is really thinking through the timeline for implementing the ideas. So in this particular scenario, we're saying, hey, we need to have that NPS score improved within the next 12 months. So we're really looking for more of those quick hit ideas that can be implemented pretty quickly. Alternatively, we do have a lot of challenges that are run on a regular basis that it could take years to implement an idea, and that's okay as well. It, again, really comes down to what is that problem you're trying to solve for. And then lastly, what does success look like for this challenge? So again, in this sample scenario, we're thinking we need to have the NPS score, we need to have the NPS score go up, right? So by how much? Maybe it's by 5%, maybe it's by 10%. What is that goal that we're looking to achieve? In other cases, it could be we need to come up with a new product, an increase to revenue, whatever it might be, right? So really kind of just looking to validate at the close of the challenge, how do we measure success? All right. The last key area that I'm going to dive into before I hand it over to Lisa is really thinking through who is the target audience for this specific challenge. Again, we can go internally to our employees, whether it be a subset of the employees or the entire base. We can also go externally to our vendors and partners, whoever might be able to help solve for that, or we could reach out to our global crowd. So when we're thinking about our audience, we typically recommend the broader the better, right? You're going to have a lot more unique perspectives if you're reaching out to more folks. So in this particular scenario where we're thinking about improving the customer experience, the default might say, okay, I'll reach out to my customer experience team. But there might be a lot of other parts of the organization that can help with that, including sales might see stuff as part of, when they're taking on a new client. Maybe IT is getting a lot of feedback on a certain pain point. So really being able to reach out to a broader audience can really give you some more unique ideas than if you just reach out to the immediate team that's working with these folks directly. So really think about who might be able to assist in getting us good quality ideas. And then, alternatively, we can also think about doing this in a few ways, right? So we could do it internally to our employees, but maybe we also want to reach out to our customers directly as well. So you can also mix and match. You don't need to determine just one path. I actually have a client right now who is reaching out to our global crowd to solve an issue that they're currently experiencing. And they're also going to reach out to their internal employee base as well to see if they have any ideas on how to achieve this. Once we have our audience identified, we want to think about, a few different things. If we're doing internal, where are they located in the business? How can they get access to the site? So do they have access to computers? Do they have an access to their phone where they can use the mobile app? How are we going to get them to participate in this challenge? And then what languages do we need to consider? Are we reaching out on a global level where some folks only speak certain languages? If so, we just need to make sure we're factoring that into our plan. Lastly, the last part of this in terms of our audience is thinking through what incentives do we need to have for the audience to get them to come in and participate. So when we're thinking internally, we're really thinking more recognition, right? We typically find that when you're reaching out to your employees, giving them an announcement at a town hall meeting, allowing them to work on an idea as it's being executed is really going to motivate them to come into the challenge and participate. If we're reaching out to our global crowd, it might be more of a monetary award. So it's really about thinking through, once you've identified that crowd, what is going to incentivize them to come in and participate. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Lisa to finish out the process and the timeline.
Thank you, Andreana. So picking up with the process, when thinking about the challenge process, there are some considerations, and these things include things like functionality, gamification, forms, both submission and evaluation, which we will address in a future webinar. We think of challenges as being in steps, and consider what activities you're asking the crowd to complete. Who needs to be involved through that submission, prioritization, development, and evaluation when you're thinking about that process. In addition to these elements of challenge planning, it's really important to consider how you're going to select your ideas. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time around this. So selecting your ideas around further development and implementation. So again, you need to consider who needs to be involved, and if you want to either leverage an existing corporate event or create a new event, even providing your idea owners and possibly teams with an opportunity to present their ideas to, for an example, an executive panel. And you might be more familiar with the terminology Shark Tank or Dragon's Den kind of scenarios. Now's a good time to really reconfirm with your sponsor their commitment to take those selected ideas forward, and consider also how you will communicate not just the selected ideas to the crowd, but importantly, communicate to the idea owners whether ideas are not being taken forward. Remember, we want everyone to have a great experience and engage in the next challenge. So if we start to turn our eyes towards timelines as well, so we're thinking about how are the steps? What are the steps for this challenge? How does each part of that process work? Who needs to be involved? And in thinking about that, also considering the timeline. As per the running of any project, having a clear or defined timeline is going to help you move that challenge forward, as well as keeping your stakeholders accountable and progressing and maintaining those prioritizations. Consider first, as you think about the timeline, what else is going on in the business? Will your challenge support an organizational focus? Are there other priorities in the business which would distract your crowd? Are you launching during a known period of holiday or cultural events? You want your challenge to get the full focus, engagement, and priority of your participants. So let's break this down a little further. Think about when you want to launch your challenge. When do you need to have your selected ideas by? Now, Andreana mentioned just now in terms of our particular scenario where our VP has got a particular timeline that she's looking to have her ideas implemented by. Is there a timescale to have them evaluated or the people in place to select the ideas? Is there a window within a project team that you need to catch? Think also around implementation. Is there a timeline for implementation? I worked with a business in the financial industry, and their challenge was with the tax department. And despite asking all the right questions, they ended up launching late and could not implement their ideas within that tax year. And they had to wait a further year to really benefit from that full selection of ideas implemented. So ideally, you want to ensure that you're really mindful of what those timescales are, not just about the collection of ideas, the process through to developing, refining, and evaluating, but also that selection process and thinking with a view or an eye on that implementation timeline is all really key. So that is the completion of what Andreana and I wanted to share with you today. I do have just one final slide around what some timelines might look like and activities. So quickly, a submission, the initial review, the pitch session, and the ideas selected. I think really importantly is a follow-up post-challenge, really having that value captured and reporting that back, sharing that back with the crowd as well. So I'd like to move and ask if there are any questions or anything further that we could share with you today.
Doesn't look like we have any questions as of yet.
So, Andreana, what do you think from your experience, what do you think has been the biggest issue or the biggest game changer when people are planning a challenge?
I think it's really comes down to getting that challenge question framed properly. If it's not framed in the correct way, you may end up with ideas that are off topic or not in line with what you're hoping to achieve. So I think that's really where we need to spend the majority of the time, is just making sure we have our question to the audience framed appropriately.
Absolutely. And I think it's also about considering the versatility of your crowd and who you're asking that question to. Because I've found personally, if the question is too narrow, then while you might get quality ideas, there's a lot fewer. Whereas if the question is a lot broader, you might get a lot more ideas. And again, you may have fewer which actually hit that target. So being mindful of how you're asking the question and then who your audience is, so that you're not using jargon or any language that may exclude some of your participants.
Absolutely. And it looks like we do have a question. So what would your advice be on finding evaluators for your challenge? And oh, sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, you go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm happy to take that on. So typically what we find is that with the sponsor being typically of some kind of senior level, they do have some direct reports, or again, depending on what that question is, they have some subject matter experts within that area. So in our example where we're talking about improving the customer experience, if we're looking to say, hey, we're really going to focus in on the onboarding part of the customer journey, we could look to get some subject matter experts that focus in on that key area and know it really well. So just again, thinking about what is the question that you're asking, and then having those delegates come directly from the sponsor. Typically, we want them to be, of a senior or of a certain level within the organization, usually about manager level, because they can kind of give the best insight as to some of the evaluation criteria, which could be the cost, the feasibility, ease of implementation, whatever those important factors are for any given challenge.
And just picking up around that evaluation criteria also, what I have seen work quite nicely is just having a mini session with those evaluators to run through that criteria to ensure that there is alignment and consistency of their reviews and evaluations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like we did get one other question. Lisa, if you want to take this one, how long do you recognize the preparation of the challenge usually takes?
I think if you're applying the challenge planning process that we use at Wazoku, it can move quite swiftly. If you've got a set process that you like to use, or for a particular challenge type, I think the time tends to be really around making sure that your communications are well planned out, that you've got your sponsor on board, and sometimes that can require a little bit of engagement and conversation to really define what that challenge process and question needs to be. In terms of timelines, it can be anywhere from half a day to set something up through to a couple of weeks if you're looking for that communication lead time.
All right, great. Thanks, Lisa. Looks like we had a few more questions come in. One is, as you're planning, do you advise looking at metrics to measure ROIs when solutions are found? I'm happy to start this one, and then Lisa, if you have anything to add, please do. But yes, we do recommend looking at any kind of initial ROI. And so typically how this works is, it's really, ROI can be very, very difficult, especially depending on the type of idea that you're looking to implement, right? Some can be pretty easy and straightforward if it's generating revenue for the organization. Other things like process improvements can be a little bit more tricky. But I think we need to think through what type of ROI can we identify in terms of these solutions. So in this case, if we're looking at improving the NPS scores, I think it's, we can take those ideas after they're implemented, measure how much the NPS has gone up as a result of taking action on those. But, we typically recommend breaking down ROI into certain buckets. So it could be, is this a cost improvement? Is this a revenue generator? Is this a process improvement? Whatever type of ROI it is. And then if you have the ability to get more granular and put money or numbers associated with it, so this could save us 2 hours a day times 10 people, go ahead and plug that in as an initial starting place at the close of the challenge. And then as you're working to further develop the idea and get it implemented, track the changes, right? And then once you have that final idea implemented, you can then go back and say, okay, here was the finals in terms of those ROI measurements. Lisa, anything you want to add on that?
Thanks, Andreana. I think that was a really fulsome answer. I think it's really important as we see innovation programs really evolve from where they were, 5-10 years ago. We're now really focusing around that value and benefit to the business. So having that clear perspective of where you are and where you want to go to is really key to be able to track that value and really bed in that benefits to the organization.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Now it looks like we have a couple more. One was, I had mentioned the question as the key component when designing a challenge. What would you do to advise the challenge managers that want to run an always on any idea challenge? This is a beast.
Yeah.
Always on, capture anything and everything. Honestly, my recommendation is I typically advise against going so broad, because what we find happens is, say you have somebody within the organization that raises their hand and says, hey, I want to capture in everything and anything ideas. I want to figure out how to make our company work better as a whole. What you're going to find is, maybe I'm the head of HR, for example, and I say I want to run this challenge. What you're going to find is you're getting a lot of ideas in the site that don't directly impact you, right? So you might get something to say, hey, I'm having computer issues all the time. If we could get new computers, that would make my workday a lot easier, and I'd save so much time and not having to contact support. Well, typically anything related to computers would probably more go to the IT department versus HR. And then in that case, you can send it over to the IT department, but they may or may not do anything with it. So again, it really ties back to thinking about what is within the sponsor's span of control. If it's something that's outside of my control, I need to go to the other heads of the departments ahead of time to get their buy-in to say, if we get ideas in this focus area, would you be willing to take action, review, and implement if it's found to be a good idea? If you don't get that buy-in, I would recommend that you do not go as broad and really filter in and focus on one key area that you can personally relate to and make sure those ideas are being executed on.
I think that's a really key point there. There's a few things around always on which you need to be careful of. And I would always recommend you have a very robust governance process around it. Because the last thing you want for your program is to have a space where people moan rather than provide solutions. What you're looking for is solutions to problems or ideas to business needs. So you want to avoid that section or that opportunity for people to moan. You want them to create a culture of coming up with ideas. Ensuring that you've got that sponsor to implement. So you've got the buy-in and you've got the visibility within your sponsors who have the ability to then take those ideas forward. And that goes to that governance process and having that robust process there. I also see some of our clients switching it up around always on too. So it's not just necessarily an always on catch all. They sometimes make it seasonal or by quarter. So they might have a focus around a particular area of the business by quarter and then do a heavy or robust review session at the end of each quarter. So there are ways to kind of keep changing it up and keep it interesting. But it is something which does require a very clear governance process and that buy-in from your senior stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. All right, we have a few more. Lisa, I'll let you take the initial stab at this, and then I can add on. Mm-hmm. Do you have any pointers on increasing engagement for a challenge? I know you can upvote and use gamification, but how are these best used to engage an audience?
Well, I think the first thing I would start with is communications. So ensuring that you've got your communications planned out, and in that you can weave into your communications incentives. Recognition is a really good opportunity as well to leverage your communications for recognition throughout. I've often seen clients use their communications on the second week that they've had a challenge open and recognize somebody in that, and we've seen an immediate uplift in engagement either in that person's particular area of the business or just generally through that communication. So I think in terms of engagement, communications, incentives is supporting as well. I think recognition is really key. So knowing who your crowd is, understanding their demographics, what's important to them, and how to really ensure that you get the most from them. I think also in terms of driving engagement, yes, you can absolutely leverage the functionality within Wazuku platform. And there are many things in there that you can use. I wouldn't perhaps, as you would cook a meal, you wouldn't necessarily take everything out of the kitchen cupboard to cook that meal. You might want to select a few things and keep it interesting for each of your challenges. Andreana, do you want to add to that?
I think you hit it spot on. I think communications and incentives is really what's going to ultimately drive participation. I do think there is one feature in the system that we might want to specifically call out that I think can really help as well. And that is using the at mention feature, where you can call out somebody to get them to come in and add their thoughts around a specific idea. So using that functionality can really pull people in if they're seeing their name got specifically called out in a challenge. But as to Lisa's point, there's a lot of other things we can do in the system as well. All right, we did get one other question here. Are universities in this process, or is it meant for individuals / companies only? Universities are absolutely part of this process. I'm working with a client now who is a university. They just launched their first challenge, and they're reaching out to their employees and staff database at this point. But we also do partner with universities with our crowd engagement as well. So Lisa might be able to better speak to this, but we do have some universities that we're directly working with to help solve some specific issues. That's kind of in a beta at this point. But Lisa, can you speak more to that? Sorry to put you on the spot with that.
Yeah, no, of course. So we're working with a group of universities. We're looking, I think it's around 1 to 2 million students who are participating in our open innovation within incentive. And we are leveraging those universities. We're encouraging those students to participate, where we've got clients asking specific questions to those universities, excuse me, to really get a sense of where the students are coming from. I'm seeing different purposes throughout. It's really interesting. Not only are we seeing a real variety of topics for the students, but we're also seeing fantastic different approach around, is it offering up internships? Is it around talent, or is it around solving a problem? And it's a really nice mix of a little bit of everything. But if you are interested in taking advantage of that incentive student competition, please do reach out to us, and we will connect you with the right person who's running those.
All right. I think that is all our questions at this point.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We hope this has been a useful session, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thanks all. Take care. Bye-bye.